When Star Wars first hit in 1977, it was a hit right away, and it was definitely clear that this was going to be something that stuck around for a couple years. It would be big in pop culture and would most likely generate some sequels. Well, of course, we all know it was even bigger than that, and as the clock ticked away, certain anniversaries came up, like the first 10 years of Star Wars in '87. I remember my best friend Brian in high school had this poster in his room, and I just thought it was so cool. I didn't know Star Wars, was celebrated like that. When the 20th anniversary came along, we were all treated to a magnet. A magnet, people! I mean, what a way to celebrate a cultural phenomenon like a fridge magnet. Well, as other anniversaries ticked by, like the 45th or the 40th, as we go backwards, I probably should have reversed those slides, well, we finally started getting action figures to dedicate to these anniversaries. And while some of them were in different scales or made of different materials, like the 40th anniversary die-cast figures, which were more figurines or statues than action figures. I did a whole video about that besides. And other anniversaries, like even just celebrating the 50th anniversary of Lucasfilm, became a reason to reissue figures. I mean, everyone needs a George Lucas in Stormtrooper disguise. What a great way to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the company he started and sold. Well, for the 25th anniversary of Star Wars, we didn't get a magnet, but we did finally get actual articulated action figures. Albeit they were the first figures released in very scene-specific poses. In fact, they were so scene-specific that they really don't work when they're not displayed on their bases and with their other figure. Outside of this, when they're posed by themselves, they do have a bit of a wonky look. Okay, I'm showing you a prototype of the Luke to emphasize the wonkiness, but while some of the figures in the sets kind of work without their partner and without the base, Han Solo is probably the exception and is the one that works the best. For the most part, if you don't have the figures paired together, yeah, they're wonky. Wonkiness in pre-posed figures would be something that would kind of perpetuate the line throughout Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith until we finally got to the Vintage Collection era. But for scene-specific figures, it was cool to get this, and it was a good way to differentiate them from previous releases. Now, the sets included 3 different pairings of main figures, all from A New Hope, the 1977 film. And the first set, commemorating Vader versus Obi-Wan, while they could have taken different approaches, like maybe doing prototype figures, the decision was made to do sort of a moment in time. We had gotten a Vader and an Obi-Wan recently in the Episode 1 flashback series that were finally able to grip their lightsabers with both hands and duel with each other, which was actually really cool because, again, people love displaying their figures in a pose from the movies. And the first releases of all these figures when Power of the Force 2 started in '95 were much more in what the industry called waiting for the bus pose, meaning they're just standing straight up. They couldn't hold their lightsabers with 2 hands, and finally getting those flashback figures, while they did have a little bit of the pre-posed wonkiness, at least you could use the articulation to get them in more or less different action poses, and if they weren't paired together, since they weren't sold together, they would still work by themselves. But when the 25th anniversary packs came along, well, these figures were meant to be paired together. If you had them by themselves, I guess you could just have, Obi-Wan or Vader holding their lightsaber in a cool pose, but putting them together really worked. And you could get a cool variety of poses out of them, or at least pairings, different ways that they could duel each other on their little Death Star base. So there was some customization in how they got displayed, but yeah, putting them together really was the way they were meant to be played with or displayed on your shelf. They weren't as much kid toys as really collectibles, because when you can't pose figures in any other way, it's a little hard to get kids excited about them. And these figures, in a way, were also kind of meant to be displayed in their package, with a nice see-through window, which, man, with all the plastic-free packaging, I sure miss executions like this, especially with that cool movie diorama backdrop. Kind of reminds me of the Epic series where we had 6-inch non-articulated figures in a movie-specific moment, but now we were going to get this in the 3 3/4. So the next set in this series featured our lovable twins, Luke and Leia, before they learned that they were lovable twins. Yeah, that was a whole thing. And this commemorated that moment when they take that big swing through the Death Star chasm because, twins with rope is fun. I don't know, Leia looks like she's not exactly enjoying herself in that behind-the-scenes shot, but, at least we didn't get the moment that they started making out with each other. Good thing that was cut from the movie. It's odd that they always were swinging, too. It's not the only time that they grabbed a rope in the trilogy like that and went for a swing. Well, for those of you who are fans of rope and fans of twins, then you are in luck, because you got both. And it was the first time you got Luke with the grappling hook. Now, we did get a grappling gun with the original release, but that was the buffed-up version of Luke, soon to be replaced by the Jedi training helmet version, which slimmed him down to a movie-accurate proportion. Same thing with Leia. That first monkey-faced Leia that got released in Power of the Force 2 was replaced about 3 years later, which is how long the toy cycle takes to catch up to fan comments, with a more screen-accurate and, I guess you could say, beautiful-looking Leia. This version of Luke and Leia on, again, a Death Star base, this time part of the, Death Star bridge, really does require both figures together in order to display correctly. Eventually, we would get an articulated version of Luke in this pose, and this is the Luke with the Stormtrooper belt. And the version released in the Vintage series came with a grappling hook as well as a his communicator and the Stormtrooper gun and lots of articulation. The version we got for the 25th was less articulated and more, again, in that PrePosed wonkiness that you really do need Leia with Luke in order to pull off the best display. But hey, they came together, so you got them both at the same time. It's not like you got one figure and couldn't pose them without making a separate purchase. So I guess props for that. The final figure in the 25th anniversary 2-pack series was Han and Chewbacca, which if you're not familiar with them, they're Han and Chewbacca. Now, again, we have them in a pre-posed position for Death Star Escape, not to be confused with this Death Star Escape, and 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 this Death Star Escape. Not to mention this Death Star Escape, this Death Star Escape, this Death Star Escape, and, well, to make things a little bit different, at least we had Escape from the Death Star on this one. Boy, you think they, have got a copyright on this thing or something. Oh, God, come up with some original names for toys. Now, Han and Chewbacca are obviously main characters in A New Hope and eventually got their own spin-off movie, which was one of the worst films ever made. But, hey, you got them posed together on, again, what is a chunk of the Death Star. But that's interesting because the only time that they were back-to-back like this, they were in Mos Eisley. And you'd think you'd get a Docking Bay 94 display base, and then it could be called Escape from Mos Eisley. But it wasn't. And again, while you do need both figures together, this is probably the only pair that actually works by themselves. The original releases in Power of the Force 2, again, were in that waiting for the bus pose and in that buffed up early 90s look that was so popular with the kiddies. So it was cool to get better, more slimmed down versions like the one from the Comtech series. Chewbacca did get sort of scaled up in a few other releases, and again, that original Power of the Force 2 one is a little buff. But if you really wanted to do Death Star Escape, Han needed his Stormtrooper belt. So I'm a little out on this set being called Death Star Escape. It's not. It's Mos Eisley Escape, because he's not wearing a Stormtrooper belt. So there. So he should not be standing on the Death Star. Oh well, you can't go for accuracy and everything, but at least we finally got figures to celebrate Star Wars and not magnets.